Okay, so today we'll discuss about XPath and CSS selectors. If you're writing automation scripts where you're automating browsers, you need to know how to target elements on a page. You can target it using class name, the tags, the IDs, but usually it's very difficult to find a unique element with just one attribute, and that is where XPath and CSS selectors come into play. You can use XPath and CSS selectors to find elements based on a combination of a tag name and some attributes. So both help you to point to specific HTML elements, but they do it in different ways. Their formats are a little different. So we'll look into it today. What is a CSS selector? A CSS selector is a pattern used to select elements based on HTML structure, classes, IDs and attributes. It is simple, fast and supported by every browser. So here we can see some of the CSS selector examples. If you want to select by tag name, you just use the tag. Now this is going to be very rare that you will select any element just by the tag, because a lot of elements will have the same tag. Select by class. So you can use something like this where explicitly you're mentioning class is equal to button, or there's a shortcut where a dot indicates class name. So here a class name which is button. Select by ID. Again your input is the tag name and an attribute ID which has the value login, or explicitly as it's mentioned here, an ID is equal to login. Select by attribute. This is also an attribute here. Similarly you can do whatever the attribute is, the name of the attribute is equal to and the value. Select inside another element, that is here the dot indicates, as mentioned earlier, class name. So you have a class, you have an element which has a class name card, and within it you have another tag which is h2. And the last example here is an unordered list which has a list within it, and you're choosing the nth child, that is the third element within that list. So when is CSS selector suitable? It is when you have a clean, predictable HTML. You require fast choosing of the element, and in most of the automation tools like Selenium. Now we look at XPath. XPath is more powerful because you can navigate the entire structure of the page even when the HTML is messy, because it allows you to move up and down and sideways in a DOM. In case of CSS selector, it's always down, right? So here we'll look at some examples. Select by tag. This is when you say double slash, it means relative, which means anywhere within the structure you have a div, then that will be selected. And this one is an absolute path, that is from the root they are telling you the path and you go and choose it. Of course this is not advisable because the structure can keep changing, so your XPaths keep breaking, and then you will have to keep fixing the scripts. Next is by text. You have a button and the text there is submit. It's not possible to find this in CSS selector, which is one of the reasons why you switch to XPath, because if you have a text which is submit, you cannot find it in CSS selector. There's no option. So, and sometimes to find a unique element you have to use the text, because other attributes might not be unique. Okay, select by attribute. Here again input tag and an attribute called type which has the value password. Now if you look at the next one, which is a contains href login. This is like a regex, you are looking for a part that is an href which contains login. It can have login for all or something like that, right? So just it's searching for a part of this attribute value. Select a parent or sibling, which means here you have a tag name label which has an attribute for having value email, and you're looking for a following sibling which has the tag value input. So XPath is actually very good because you can look for siblings downwards, or you can look for parents and ancestors which becomes a little clumsy when it comes to CSS selector. Now if we look at converting these XPaths to CSS selectors, it is much easier. You see this div here would be written as div, just div, without using the front slashes. In case of select by text, you would just do button and say here text cannot be converted, so this is going to be tricky. You have to look for something else, right? But this one, like an attribute, you can just do an input and type is equal to password, right? So anything that's written in XPath, you can kind of convert it into a CSS selector, which is going to be a little simpler to write, and the traversal is faster. So CSS selector XPaths or scripts would run faster. Okay. And when do you use XPaths? When there are complex pages, element without classes or IDs, when you need text-based targeting, like even this one, you won't find an equivalent in CSS selector, and when you need to jump across the DOM. Okay, so that is for XPath. And if you look at a quick comparison, here the speed, as mentioned earlier, CSS selectors are faster, these are slightly slower. Readability is simpler because you don't have the slashes, you have shortcuts like dot and hash. And CSS selectors, can they move up? No. Once you find a selector, you have to go down or at that level. An XPath you can with the access, and it supports text matching. No. Here XPath, and this sometimes becomes a deal breaker where you have to use XPath. Best for clean modern sites, and when you have complex or dynamic sites, you use XPath. And when should you use? Here, as mentioned earlier, well structured HTML, pick CSS selectors, and otherwise use XPaths. But in automation in general, you keep switching between both. So whichever is simpler and seems like a stable XPath which will not change, you should use that. So now let's look at one example. Like this is an Amazon website, and to look at the XPath, to find the XPath, we can look at this element. Okay, so here you have this search box which is tag type input, and these are the attributes. So if before you start writing using it in your script, you always have to see that the value is unique. So here if I want to write a CSS selector, I could just use the ID, right? So I could use something like hash, which is for the ID and this value. So here you see you get two elements, which means that it is not unique. So if I want unique, I can match it with something else. Let's say a class name. So here a class name is nav input. You can use nav input. See. So dot control V. So you see I used a class name and then the ID, and now I can find the search box uniquely. Okay. So when you are testing, try to find check it here to make sure that the element is uniquely identified. If I want to find this using an XPath, I would do input, okay, and @class is equal to, okay, this is not going to give me because only a part of it I had used. Let me find the ID. Right, so it gave me the ID. So this is how you have to play around with the tags, the input values, and find the unique element with which you want to interact in your script. So this is a brief overview of CSS Selector and XPath.